While the phrase ahead of its time can be quite cliche, it's a perfect way of describing White Day, a Labyrinth Named School. A 2001 Korean first-person survival horror title, White Day was a pioneering title in the defenseless horror approach, a style of horror that would explode in popularity in the early 2010s thanks to games like Amnesia: The Dark Descent, where a pursuer, or pursuers, are relentless in hunting down the player. You have no means of defense. Flee or hide are your only options. White Day builds an engrossing atmosphere with its empty high school after dark setting. Horror games like to use schools for a stretch or two, but White Day will devote its entire runtime to the confines of a high school, and make the most of it. It contains solid survival horror puzzles. Nothing too brain-dead simple, but nothing that slows the game to a halt. With a small cast of characters, White Day builds out an intriguing web of a plot for us to untangle. Pulling influence from urban legends and Taoism, White Day has some of the better scares and unsettling tales that I've come across in the horror game. Now, the game isn't without its notable flaws. Our pursuer can be a pain to deal with due to how wonky the AI can be and how frequent he can show up. Tension melts away to become frustrating well before game's end, which does put a hamper on the game's replayability. White Day offers a multitude of different endings to explore, and as engaging as the plot can be, this complex web of details gets muddy in the game's end stretch when it pulls back the curtain. While it had a small but devoted audience in South Korea, White Day would never get an official release outside of it. There was a Western release scheduled for 2004, 3 years after its initial release, but never came to fruition. But, thanks to devoted fans, translation patches would make it available to other languages beyond Korean. For it's a game well worth checking out. If you enjoy what I cover on the channel and are looking for something more off the beaten path, White Day is well worth your time.
분명 둘 중에 누군가를 알고 있을 거야. 어쩌면
A few things to note. What I'm playing here is White Day repackaged, courtesy of the modder Amnesia. I'll link to it in the pinned comment and description if you're interested in playing it yourself, which I do recommend you do. I had no issues in getting the game running on my computer. Download and play. Amnesia suggests to play the game in a 4:3 aspect ratio as I did here. I did have an odd quirk with the resolution settings. Past a certain resolution, the game would play in 30 FPS, such as 1440 by 1080p and higher, but lower resolutions like 1280 by 960 had the game running at 60 FPS. Not sure if it's only on my system, but something to be aware of if you do play White Day. I did discover this quirk a bit further into the game. There will be a few cases where my footage does switch between 60 and 30 FPS. There were some moments that I couldn't replicate, but wanted to share. As well, for this video, I'm only looking at the original version of White Day from 2001. White Day was a bit ahead of the curve in more ways than one. It would get a remake in the mid-2010s, a few years before the remake craze that has plagued gaming since, especially in the horror realm. I doubt that I will look at it down the road. I watched a bit of a playthrough of the remake and it looks to be a significant downgrade to the original. It loses plenty of the subtleties of the original and looks to be more of a streamer bait title. In White Day, we play as Lee Hee-min. At least that is his default name. We do have the option in naming him. He is a recent transfer to Yeondu High School in Seoul. He has a crush on fellow student So Young. Hee-min wants to give her candy for White Day, a day celebrated each year on March 14th, 1 month after Valentine's Day. More prominent in Eastern Asian countries, White Day is where men give gifts to women. As he approaches So Young sitting on a bench outside the school, a picture of hers blows towards Hee-min. We get a brief glimpse, one of So Young with someone else, but she snatches the photo away. She leaves with one of her friends, but leaves her diary behind on the park bench. Instead of running after her, Hee-min waits until nighttime to return to Yeondu High School. He plans on leaving her diary and candy on her desk. We will run to two girls early on. One we saw earlier that left with So Young in the first cutscene. This is Ji-yeon, or Glasses Girls the wiki calls her, and Sang-ah. We have some dialogue choices when they ask us what we're doing here. We could tell them our intentions or to mind their own business. An alarm will interrupt our conversation. My goodness, this alarm. I'm always fascinated by the choice of sound effects in games, whether they make their own or pull from vast sound libraries. For White Day, they decided to choose the most annoying sound possible for an alarm. Don't worry, I'll only give you a small sampling.
Hey, want to hear the most annoying sound in the world?
I get the usage of an alarm like this in the real world. You need to get people's attention, but in the game, can we go with something less obnoxious? especially when you're still getting a feel for the game. It may take you a few minutes your first time around to turn off the alarm, for we have to go through a few hurdles, like finding a pair of wire cutters and grabbing a stepladder to reach the vent. I had my volume at a whisper for this stretch. The game launcher does allow you to shut off the alarm sounds, an absolute godsend on further playthroughs. While navigating through the vents, we will witness a gruesome sight. One unlucky student getting kissed upside the cranium with an aluminum baseball bat before the perpetrator drags them off. This perpetrator is one of the school janitors who doesn't seem keen on us being here. Making our way through the vent, we could finally turn off the alarm after a classic survival horror puzzle of flipping the right switches on a breaker. Although before you can, you need to turn on the light in this room to see, which is a bit odd as it seems like it shouldn't be a problem, but I get it, the game is teaching us about light switches, something that you'll want to keep in mind at all times moving forward. Peace and quiet, at least for now. And what was with this room earlier? It had a different appearance before we shut off the alarm. And what's with this glowing wooden amulet in the nearby safe? What's going on here? Heading further into the school, a different bat-brandishing janitor will chase after us. Jian will grab us and hide as the pursuer passes by before she heads off. Here, the game begins proper. Now, before diving further into White Day, I want to dive into the gaming landscape at the time, starting with the gaming scene in South Korea, how White Day emerged, and then expand across the globe. Games developed in South Korea have seen a meteoric rise in recent years on the international stage. Titles like Lies of P, Stellar Blade, and Crimson Desert have achieved commercial and critical success. But let's rewind the clock back to the early 2000s. Things were a bit different. I did make brief mention of the gaming scene in Korea at the time in my video on Mystic Knights, a 2005 survival horror hack and slash mashup from a South Korean studio for the PlayStation 2. There were less than a handful of Korean-developed PlayStation 2 titles. White Day predates Mystic Knights, releasing in September of 2001 on the PC. White Day also predates popular MMOs made in Korea like Ragnarok Online and MapleStory, which were released in 2002 and 2003. MMOs dominated the gaming scene in Korea. At the time of White Day's release, the largest Korean MMO was Lineage, releasing in 1998. In a pre-World of Warcraft world, Lineage was the largest MMO in the world. At one point it was larger than every other Western MMO combined. It was the first MMO to reach 1 million subscribers. This time frame of 2001 was a few years removed from South Korea lifting its ban on Japanese pop culture imports in late 1998. Despite the ban lifting, most of Korean gaming was not focused on consoles but on the PC. There were several reasons for the PC being the dominant player in the market. The Korean government made early heavy investments into broadband internet. Korea was in the midst of a financial crisis that swept across Asia at the time, the IMF crisis. There were high levels of unemployment, freeing up time for many. During this recession, PC bongs, or gaming cafes, took the country by storm. There were around 3,000 by the end of 1998 and 15,000 by the end of 1999. A cheap way to play games, they were a communal space to play games with friends, against them, or with them. MMOs were a perfect fit for the environment. But if you're like me, when you think of South Korea, you associate it with a game I haven't yet mentioned. One that wasn't even made in Korea.
스타크래프트.
For all the aforementioned reasons, it was a perfect storm of the psionic variety that made StarCraft so prominent in South Korea. Its sheer level of polish and quality doesn't hurt. If you were to say, hey Boulder, I think StarCraft is the greatest game ever made, I'd have no issues with that statement. The many hours young Boulder spent on use map settings on Battle.net. Or the base game itself. Tournaments starting in PC bongs grew beyond the hallowed halls into larger spaces. Korean TV stations would begin to broadcast matches of the highest caliber players. Top players became celebrities within the nation. 2001 was a notable year for StarCraft, and not only for its growing competitive scene. 2001 marked the game's final balance patch that remains to this day. So during this time frame in the late 1990s, along comes a Korean developer called Sonori who wants to make a horror game. A team with little experience but plenty of passion. They look at games like Resident Evil and decide to do something better and different from its many clones. There were about 13 staff on the project. The initial plan was a 10-month development cycle, a vast underestimate. When they started development, Korea had next to 0 full 3D titles. The basic tech demo itself took around 8 months. The initial iteration, which involved a serial killer and the occult, would have a major overhaul with a change in director. Instead of having the game broken up room by room, they went for a seamless progression through a single building with no loading. That said, the final product will have loading screens between the buildings, but they did keep them to a minimum, which is quite the technical feat for its time. Designing around the keyboard as opposed to a controller, they went with a first-person perspective where you could do most movements with only the mouse. Holding the right mouse button moves you forward, double tapping allows you to sprint, holding both the right and left button moves you backward, use the left mouse to examine and pick up objects, and use the mouse wheel to crouch or stand up. While most survival horror titles at this time took the fixed camera approach, you did have other horror games using the first-person perspective. Ones that predated White Day include Hell Knight, Echo Knight, Eru. The perspective would gain more prominence as graphic fidelity increased. And speaking of predating White Day, there was another South Korean survival horror title from 1998. One using the classic fixed camera approach. A game called Geisters, which I found buried amongst abandonware oddities. Set in a post-apocalypse world with a heavy sci-fi aesthetic, Geisters never made its way outside of South Korea, just like White Day, but there's never been a fan translation and there's next to zero information about it. Looking beyond South Korea, what was going on with horror gaming in 2001? It was a time of transition from the 5th generation, the Saturn, PS1, and 64 era, to the 6th generation, the Dreamcast, PS2, GameCube, and Xbox era. The Dreamcast was closing up shop as Sega dropped hardware to focus on software. The PlayStation 2 would start to hit stride after a bit of a lackluster launch. The GameCube and Xbox would launch later in the year. There were horror titles that would release versions for both the 5th and 6th generation, like Alone in the Dark: The New Nightmare, which would be the first of several series reboots. A decent game that was playing catch-up with Resident Evil. You had the release of Extermination, with a more action-heavy approach being the first survival horror title for the PS2. Decent, if unremarkable. With the swan song of the Dreamcast, you had one of its final titles released that spring, Illbleed. One of the more overlooked, original, unique, and bizarre horror games I've ever played. Scratch that. One of the most overlooked, original, unique, and bizarre games I've ever played, horror or otherwise. But there were 2 landmark horror titles from 2001 that would stand head and shoulders above the rest. One being the first Fatal Frame, or Project Zero, a late 2001 Japanese release that would see an early 2002 release in the West. One of the more popular and acclaimed franchises in the survival horror space that, while having long gaps between games, still runs to this day. And in September of 2001, the same month White Day released, was Silent Hill 2. While it didn't do large sales numbers, its reputation has grown over the years to the very peak of survival horror and gaming in general. Where any game that dives into the psychological and the horror realm gets compared to Silent Hill 2 in some shape or form. A standout title from a year that you can make a strong argument for being the greatest year in gaming. I'd give the edge to years like 2004 or 1998, but 2001 is right up there. Especially the fall season. My goodness, that fall lineup. Not only did you have the launch of the Xbox and GameCube, but you had legendary launch titles that are still held in high regard. The PlayStation 2 would see many monumental releases. New IPs that would go on to become long-running series. Others being follow-ups and expanding on what came before. It seems like every other week saw the release of what would become some of the most adored, best-selling, and most influential games ever. Most notable being Grand Theft Auto 3. Often imitated and for the most part, never duplicated. Take a look at this print advertisement Sony ran during this time frame for the fall and holiday season of 2001. In this day and age, you'd be lucky to get this number of quality big budget releases across a console's lifespan, and at least half of them would be remasters from the prior generation. And amongst this incredible time frame of 2001, you had White Day lost in the shuffle, which would gain a devoted audience, but a bit of a footnote in history with its lack of an international release. But I'll do my best here to give the game its due. So what does White Day consist of? We'll explore through the school, solve puzzles, read notes, get to the bottom of what's going on, all while avoiding a killer janitor, amongst other things. On the note of exploring, our movement speed. It's one of the more glaring issues with White Day. You could sprint, walk, or crouch walk. He-Man must do well in the track team, for he has a decent sprint speed and can go for some time before slowing down. One of my bigger pet peeves in games is sprint functions, where your character sprints for a handful of seconds before having to replenish their stamina like they're a chain smoker. Why not make the default speed faster and not bother with a sprint? It's always the question that pops to mind. That's not the issue with White Day. Sprint is great. Of course, it makes plenty of noise and will draw the janitor to you like a moth to a flame. But if you want to make less frequent appearances, and believe me, you'll want to, you need to walk. You make far less noise and won't draw as much attention to yourself. But here lies the issue. The default movement speed? Far too slow. Feels like the default speed here should be the movement speed while crouching. He-Min takes his sweet time. Now I get what they're going for, the trade-off between sprinting and walking. Sprinting to get around faster but draw the janitor's attention. Walk to reduce the possibility of running into the janitor but deal with the slower movement. Now it's not like the school is mammoth in its size, but you still will be going back and forth amongst floors on the regular. Still, movement speed is not something that comes up often in the games I've covered on the channel. But for White Day, it sticks out like a sore thumb. He-Min has a backpack in tow and will use it for his inventory. The game does not pause when you're navigating through your gear, the map, or journal, something you have to give great consideration to when the janitor is in pursuit. He can kill you in short order. You need to have the right timing to heal yourself while opening your inventory. I love the backpack aesthetic when you bring up your inventory, the unzipping sound and the animation. It's these small details that help immerse you further in the world. Immersive UIs are a bit of a lost art in modern gaming, where more often than not, they're minimalist in looks and in soul, using quote-unquote best UI practices and focus tested to death, where they're all interchangeable with every other game. One of White Day's greatest strengths is its usage of the high school after dark setting, a classic locale where you could deliver a tense, unnerving experience. White Day will devote its entire runtime to the confines of Yondu High School. Beyond the first obscure game, I don't recall any other games I've covered on the channel that devote its entire runtime within school grounds. There have been horror games that have stretches within schools, it's quite common. One of the more notable being the first Silent Hill. One of the better stretches of Silent Hill F took place within the school. While the major downgrade from the first game, Fear 2's school level, was a series standout, the first Condemned and Dead Space 2 had memorable, excellent stretches within school settings, but for those games, schools were only a pit stop along the way. In White Day, the school is it. And boy, do they make the most of it. The school after dark setting taps into an innate fear within us all. Places we spent day in and day out during our younger years full of energy and people, but to walk these halls at night when no one is around, something feels off. Feels wrong. I hate to say the term as the idea has been run into the ground, but liminal space can be applicable here. I'm sure we've all had dreams or nightmares at some point in our lives of entering school halls at night, or for the more mischievous, broke into your school after hours. For research, the development team did scour schools at night to tap into that uneasy feeling. For other sources of inspiration, they looked to the works of Junji Ito. From the land of cinema, they pulled inspiration from recent Japanese horror films like Ringu and Ju-on. But there's one horror film that had the most notable influence on White Day, that being the 1998 Korean horror film Whispering Corridors. Surprise hit that would go on to have 6 films in the franchise. It's one of the major films to kickstart the Asian horror film boom in the late 90s. Taking place in an all-girls high school, Whispering Corridors is very much the definition of a slow burn. If anything, a bit too slow, and the payoff isn't as satisfying as I hope it would be. But it is a decent watch. You can see the influence it had on the layout of Yondu High School in White Day. There's a few rooms, such as the sculpture room, that feel like a nod to the film. You could tell the development team had a strong understanding of what made exploring in titles like Resident Evil work. You have many of the common survival horror tropes. You have doors locked from one side to open up later to loop around for a shortcut. That said, don't expect too much of this due to the school layout. The school doesn't have an oddball design. It's not like it used to be an art gallery and refurbished into a school. It's what you expect of a school layout. That said, variety is the spice of life, and the game will change out layouts in different buildings as we progress. They don't all blur together, but I did find myself resorting to my map more often to remember what room was on what floor compared to something like a Resident Evil game. At first I thought we were getting the Silent Hill treatment where many doors and rooms would forever be inaccessible, broken locks or doors, but once you find keys, more or less every room will become accessible. Most classrooms will have 2 entrances, one to unlock within a key and the other we can unlock from the other side. Something that you'll want to do. It gives you another way out when dealing with the janitor in pursuit. You have limited saves. Pens are the game's equivalent of the ink ribbon. Washrooms will contain notepads that we could use to save a game. Keep an eye out for them while venturing throughout the school. Another survival horror trope is items having the occasional shine to grab the player's attention. In White Day, you have to be right over an object to grab it. and I mean right up to it. I would have points where I'd have to crouch and stand to position myself to pick up an item on a desk. There's one item above a toilet stall at the game's beginning. With a stepladder, I tried for several minutes to position myself to grab it, but to no avail. While you can find healing items tucked away in lockers and rooms, we do have another source: vending machines. Find coins in our travels, insert into a vending machine, and take what comes out. Small addition, but does further help with the immersion of the school setting. Speaking of immersion, White Day makes use of the age-old horror trope of notes for world building and puzzles, where notes will highlight key passages for players to pay attention to. Most notes we could pick up to put in our journal, but there are a few that we can't for whatever reason. When we do access them, they will have highlights or key information, but they remain in place, not for us to take. White Day does have one of the better usage of notes that I've come across in a horror game. There's always that suspension of disbelief when it comes to notes in games, where you can't help but wonder at points why people would ever leave such notes hanging around. This can be especially egregious in survival horror games, but White Day will have small little additions that can make a world of difference. Like one of the first major puzzles of the game, finding a combination to a safe. Instead of only saying, here's how you figure it out, it tells you that a certain individual has a bad memory, so he remembers the combination by another means. Little details like this help these notes feel far less contrived compared to other similar titles. With regard to puzzles within White Day, there's nothing that's a brain-dead puzzle, but there's none that grind the game's momentum to a halt. Many have a decent level of satisfaction from solving, where you go, I think I have the right answer, and once you solve it, you get that nice little dopamine hit. As well, White Day does not fall victim to a common survival horror puzzle trap, one that's plagued many games I've covered on the channel, one which I like to call the regurgitator puzzle, where you find something from a note, enter that information one-to-one elsewhere, which at that point, why not give us something like a key instead for the sake of progress instead of a half-assed puzzle? I'm using the term puzzle loosely here. It's good to have some pen and paper next to you and apply that knowledge to solve these roadblocks. For example, the aforementioned puzzle of finding the combination for the safe. As mentioned in the note, the combination uses the amount of 4 different types of sports balls. If this were a more classic regurgitator puzzle, all these balls would reside in the same room as the safe. That's not the case. According to the gym class schedule note, balls are not being put back after class. With this note, we note the classrooms, count each ball type in each, and use that to get the combination. Similar to regurgitator puzzle, but there's more involvement in getting that correct answer. Another example is the piano puzzle involving bloody keys. This is a bit more straightforward than the infamous bloody piano puzzle from Silent Hill. Note the melody that plays from blood dropping on the keys. Use a nearby note to discern which piano keys to use for a corresponding dial pad. Once again, it's always handy to have pen and paper nearby to work out the solution. Amusing thing here where the note gives us a list of how to play certain songs on the phone dial pad, including Teletubbies? How random. Unless I missed something, I couldn't get this to work as the phone cuts you off after 4 numbers. As well, several puzzles will have different answers each playthrough to keep things fresh each replay. I've made mention of him throughout, but it's time to dive into White Day's main hook. Our pursuer with whom we have no means of defense against beyond running and hiding. The janitor who prowls the halls. When spotted, he'll make a beeline to us. He'll kiss us upside the cranium with an aluminum baseball bat. He will make short work of you. While he's not what I call a scary pursuer, it's always in the eye of the beholder, there is something unsettling about that laugh and his unchanging facial expression as he bludgeons you to death. He'll walk with a limp which we could hear from a distance, but the most notable auditory warnings are the keys. That jingle, jangle, jingle. And I'm not talking about spurs. The first in-game encounter I had with him was a game highlight. Both good and bad. There's a great build-up to the moment. At this point, I was still customizing myself to the world of White Day. Here comes the jingle jangle of keys and grunts of the janitor. There's a bathroom nearby, so I shut off the lights and head into a stall. I hear him approaching. Oh boy, I'm screwed, am I? Well, let's see how this turns out. Yeah, that did take me out of the moment. I lied earlier. We do have another means of defending ourselves beyond hiding and running, but in a way the game didn't intend for us to do. One of gaming AI's most formidable foes, pathfinding. The janitor loves to get stuck indoors, or have his pathfinding go AWOL in the set of stairs. Or as we saw in that one clip in the toilet stall, he did glitch out the back wall. This actually did happen a couple times during my playthrough while hiding in a toilet stall. This can be a major deal breaker in these kind of games, especially with no means of defense. This is not like the AI from something like Alien Isolation that learns from your behavior. Now, to be fair, this was a small budget title from 2001. Postmortems, they did talk about how the janitor's AI does work, a system that sounds similar to enemies' behavior in stealth games. The janitor walks preset waypoints in the patrol state. Unusual conditions, like the sound of sprinting, doors open, or lights on that shouldn't be on, will switch him to an alert state. During this alert state, their visual and detection range increases. He will search the area for time before returning to patrol state. He will return things to a normal state, like closing a door or turning off lights. He will make grunts to notify a shift in state awareness. Of course, if he spots you, he will hunt you down for quite some time, at which point it's fleeing and hiding. So while these can be tense, terror-filled moments, the evasion of the janitor can turn into frequent annoying affairs. The most notable being how frequent he can pop up. As mentioned earlier, sprinting will draw his attention, but that default movement speed can be agonizing in its sluggishness. And even then, he could show up far more than you wish for if you're only walking around. Now, there will be stretches where he doesn't appear as we have to deal with other things that go bump in the night. He's not hunting us down every single moment throughout White Day. But as we approach the game's end, I was ready to never see him again. Leave me in peace to solve some puzzles or grab key items, for there are certain actions or items we can't grab unless he's not pursuing us. Now with the stairwells, he can be easy to lose for time, but due to the school layout, you'll be running into him as you make your way to a room you need to visit. So always be vigilant. Close the doors and turn off the lights when leaving a room. Give him as little reason as possible to investigate. When it comes to the stalkers or pursuers in survival horror titles, there's always that fine line with balance. How often will they show up? How long will they hunt us down for before giving up? What kind of options do we have in dealing with them? Do I have guns, items, traps, or the environment? How smart is their AI? Do they show up when I pick up key items or move along the critical path? If they don't show up often enough, the game will lack tension and fear, unless they're relentless in hunting you down. When you're on their radar, it's a big issue. If they show up too often, you could lose that sense of dread and the game turns to annoyance. That's enough. Give me a breather to deal with other things. Other games may mix up the enemy variety to keep things fresh. And White Day will mix things up, but not to the extent of other titles. And compared to some of these other titles, the frequency of the janitor showing up did drive the game away from dread into annoyance and frustration. Don't get me wrong, there were great chases that had me on the edge of my seat, but it did start to weigh on the game's enjoyment as it progressed. As we move through the game's major beats, I'll go into more detail about some of these cases that could grind the game to a halt. Before we get there, I did want to bring up another issue with the janitor. One not as egregious, but one worth mentioning. That being sound positioning and mixing. You can hear the jangling of keys from a mile away, but his footsteps are far more helpful. You get a far better idea of the janitor's distance and position from you through their footsteps. Thing is, the jangling of keys will drown out the footsteps, and the jangling will always remain loud until out of range. It's difficult to gauge the janitor's position by keys alone. There were several times where I'd hide in a classroom and be unsure whether to take a peek or leave. The janitor is in this hallway, but is he approaching this classroom? Did he go past? Is it safe to go out? I thought this might have been a possible sound glitch on my system, but looking and listening to playthroughs on YouTube, that doesn't seem to be the case. Compare it to something like Thief, the gold standard of stealth and sound positioning, where you had a pinpoint idea of where others were through sound positioning alone.
Though for though the hand of the builder doth still shape man of the world through our actions, they are legion who do not believe and would tear down thy work.
In White Day, it's not quite there. Once I did learn this trick of listening closer for the footsteps, it became easier to get a gauge, but was still an annoyance with how it's buried underneath the sound of keys. So if the janitor is a bit more of an annoyance than scares, where does White Day deliver on the scare front? There are some one-off moments, but there's also a persistent spirit for the game's first 2 sections. That being the ghost head. My goodness, could this ghost head catch me off guard at times. The game warns us of her presence from this unsettling sound, one that we all hate. The nails on the chalkboard sound. Her head floats at a snail's pace towards us, one that's hard to see unless she is up close and personal. She'll inflict a bit of physical damage, but it's the psychological damage that can be devastating. To say these moments could startle me would be an understatement. There's no cliched audio stinger. Upon contact, the screen flashes red, she laughs, and vanishes into the night. To make matters worse, this draws the janitor's attention to your location. While she doesn't make many appearances, it was always an unsettling experience when I'd hear the sound of the nails on the chalkboard. If she was going to damage me, at least do so face to face as opposed to startling me from behind. The physical appearance of the ghost was not created by the development team, but from an image found. An internet search for photos of spirits brought it up. One that came from a ghost story book. They had to track down the publisher to get permission to use it. Put in as a prank, it scared the living daylights out of the producer the following day, and they kept it in. Further patches removed her from very easy and easy mode due to player feedback due to its scary nature. On the note of getting permission, White Day's soundtrack threw me for a loop. Despite it fitting the game like a glove, a vast majority of the soundtrack was not composed for the game itself. Instead, it came from an 18-minute experimental track from Korean composer Hwang Byung-ki released 25 years before White Day. The name of the composition? Labyrinth. The track blends the gaya gum, a Korean string instrument, with the wailing of a woman. When I first heard it, I thought this was some other spirit stalking the halls of the high school. White Day doesn't loop the 18-minute track over and over. It will take bits and pieces and loop short sections. Some of the menu sounds come right from the composition itself. If you want an unsettling experience, go for a late night walk listening to the song or try falling asleep to it. Can't begin to imagine what kind of strange dreams you'll have as a result. The game's director brought the track in, unsettling everyone. They found it worked so well, they reached out to Hwang Byung-ki for permission to use the track, which he agreed to. After the game's release, the track grew in popularity and notoriety. It became a bit of an urban legend. Listen to it 3 times and you'll die. Those kind of urban legends. It's an inspired design decision that takes the atmosphere of White Day to a whole other level, making it one of the better, unsettling atmospheres I've experienced in a horror game. With that, let's go through the major beats and events of White Day. The good, the bad, and the frustrating. White Day keeps a small cast of characters. An earlier iteration did have other male characters we'd run into, but ended up on the cutting room floor. We have already met the other 3 students whose paths we will cross throughout. So Young during the game's intro and our reason for being here, to give her the White Day candy and her diary back. In the hallway with the fire alarm, we met Sung-ah and Ji Young. They based the personalities of the 3 girls off of the 3 main characters of Neon Genesis Evangelion. So-young mirrors Rei with her enigmatic, mysterious ways. Sung-ah takes after Asuka with her brash personality. Ji-hyun's timid, inquisitive nature takes after Shinji. Our dialogue choices will play a major role in what ending we get, along with a few key actions. These choices will also determine who pops up more often throughout. With how I first played through White Day, So-young made frequent appearances. But depending on your dialogue choices with Sung-ah and Ji-yeon, they can appear more often. One unsettling thing about conversations is seeing their breath as they speak. No one complains about being cold. There's no signs that it's freezing within the school. It adds to that unease of this spirit-ridden locale with many secrets to hide. With regard to secrets, there's many notes beyond hints to puzzles that we'll come across. ones that tell the many ghost stories about the school. Talking to the other 3 girls will also give us further insights. Yondu High has a bit of a troubled past. There are conflicting reports about what was on this land before becoming a school in the 1950s. It was a prison camp during the Japanese occupation of Korea. It was a hospital or refugee camp during the Korean War. In more recent years, there have been many strange deaths of students and staff. Some suspicious, like the ghost head woman. She was a lunch lady who had her head decapitated when scaffolding fell on her. A head that would go missing. Other deaths include those leaving off buildings, or hangings. There's one hanging spirit we'll come across in the early stretch of the first building. She will be a pivotal character in the grand scheme of White Day. It won't be long before we run to So-young herself while navigating through the first building. An intruding spirit will interrupt our conversation.
네가 가지고 있었구나. 아주 잃어버린 줄 알았어.
To free So-young from this tree, we need to solve the vault puzzle I brought up earlier to obtain the chemical solvent. During the stretch, we don't have to worry about the janitor. But we'll have other things to deal with, like this 13 seconds of looping laughter. This comes right from the aforementioned Labyrinth track. It's unsettling and dread-inducing to say the least, for this stretch can take you a bit to collect everything you need. You need to find a tucked-away key to open the classrooms to count the 4 different ball types for the vault combination. All while this looping laughter continues in the background. Once we have the key and solvent, we can deal with the base of the tree. There's a spirit scurrying around from point to point around this tree. From one of the ghost story notes we could find, this is a young girl who had an obsession with a potted plant. When someone dropped a solvent mixture into it by accident, she went hysterical. Staff would later find the young student dead. After dealing with the tree, we have a pivotal moment that will determine our ending path. To note, this is quite early in the game. Horror games with multiple endings tend to do that later on, and to be frank, this moment here doesn't seem to be like a big deal, but it is. We will run into Sangha once again. She mentions that all these strange happenings began after we showed up. The sound of a spirit crying gets her to flee.
저 소리 들려?
We now have an option, run after her or go toward the sound of the crying girl. I decided to follow the sounds, where the hangirl earlier appears once again. As a result, So-young will come talk to us. Why she's here at night, it's a bit of a mystery at this point. There's a couple of amulets we picked up during the stretch that we can use to unlock the next building. I love the looping sound for where you need to place them. This isn't from the Labyrinth track. Whether it's an original sound or from a sound library, I don't know. As well, that crying spirit will make further appearances, this time in-game, and seems to be guiding us forward. Building 2 has a bit of a different layout compared to the first building. There we had 2 floors with branching off hallways. Building 2 is more vertical with 4 floors but no branching hallways. With more floors, it is easier to lose a janitor in the staircase, but a bit trickier on a floor-by-floor basis with less branching paths. We hear one of the last things you want to hear in a spirit-ridden school. A ringing telephone. It sounds like a girl suffocating played in reverse greets us. Do keep this phone call in mind for later. So-young joins us for a time and asks us if we do believe in ghosts. Well, I do now. She mentions that with the locations traveled past the school, someone performed an exorcism. They used amulets to keep the bad energy at bay. We'll run into Ji-yeon. So-young asks what she's doing here. Ji-yeon, surprised, mentioned that she called her to come to school this night. So-young has no recollection of this conversation.
한참 찾았잖아. 학교는 왜 들어와가지고. 네가 전화했었잖아. 내가 전화했다고? 무슨 소리야? 분명히 소영이 네 목소리였어. 정말 내 목소리 맞아?
The two girls will leave us to head to the next building. Funny how they're able to get to the next building without an amulet. When we try to enter the next building without the amulet, we end up in a never-ending hallway that loops over and over. Beyond the piano puzzle I brought up earlier, there's a small puzzle here that the first Resident Evil remake loved to use, where you rotate an item around to find something. We'll find a CD, which if we look at in our inventory, highlights that it feels heavy. Up until now, I didn't realize you could turn items in your inventory. Flip the CD over and lo and behold, there's the key we need. Throughout this building, there will be the occasional quake, something shaking the building to its very foundations. So what's causing this? Well, its answer really took me by surprise. Now, this giant baby doesn't come out of nowhere. There is a bit of foreshadowing with a note we could find in this building. A senior student falls deep in love with a boy and begins a relationship, but he becomes distant and detached as time passes. She gets pregnant and he will leave her should she decide to keep the baby, which she decides to do. Her fate and the baby left unknown, although Ji-yeon can provide more insight if we took a different path of dialogue options. Rumors spread that she died by overdose while pregnant. At times, people can hear the sounds of a baby crying, which we do as well while making our way through this building. The baby will remain as is, with no janitor present during the stretch. We need to assemble a clay doll to give to the baby. What follows is quite a heartwarming ending as we put its spirit to rest. We run into So-young, who got separated from Ji-yeon. Like Sang-ah, she points out our presence here has made the spirits worse, as if there's been a weakening of the barrier to keep the spirits at bay. Well, we have been taking amulets and putting them in slots. We also now have the option to give back her diary, which I did. I mean, beyond the White Day candy, that's why we're here. To note, you can't read the diary itself. Its contents are unknown. Before we separate, we have one of those awkward romantic moments where we get one of the funnier dialogue options.
깜짝 놀랐어.
Building 3 has some of the game's best moments and best scares, along with being the most frustrating. The building has a far different layout than the prior 2 buildings. There are 3 key cards we need to find to unlock rooms. Compare that to the first building where we found a master key. Beyond a hallway, there's the addition of an atrium with several floors. The wide open space gives the janitor far more opportunities to spot us. There were a few cases where it felt like there was no way the janitor should have been able to spot me, yet he did. Getting a gauge on the lighting and shadows is quite finicky. It's far more difficult to lose him in the atrium. And to note, this is a different janitor. This is the one we saw during the game's intro while climbing through the vent. The one who bludgeoned a fellow student to death. He doesn't have a limp and is far more difficult to escape from. There's one door that would make it far easier to evade by heading down a hall, but this requires the last key card we come across. There were stretches here where it felt like forever to get away from the janitor, only for him to spot me yet again in the atrium. And to make matters worse, he did kill me at one point, sending me back a good 25 minutes since my last save, which made me far more inclined to save more often moving forward. That said, it's not like the game is throwing pens your way left, right, and center. It's not like the ink ribbons from Resident Evil. They are in far fewer supply in White Day. When you boot up the game setup, one option allows you to turn off the janitor. I won't lie, I came mighty close to turning this off for a stretch, to give myself the ability to explore in peace for but a few minutes. I pushed through, but boy was I tempted. One thing that always fascinates me about the Resident Evil 2 remake is how people feel about Mr. X. One of the most popular mods for the game, when you look beyond the adult content, is removing Mr. X. A mod I've never considered trying out. He adds so much to the overall game and how he could throw a wrench in your plans. That said, the game knew when to dial back to give you a bit more breathing room. By this third building here in White Day, I was more than ready to be done with the janitors. That said, this will be the final building in which we need to worry about them. For there is much to enjoy in this building. There's a couple of game highlights, like what awaits us in the dance studio. There's a key card here, but it's on the other side of the mirror. What happens when we put that CD from earlier into the CD player? A White Day continues to surprise and delight me when it dials back on the frustrations. You need to avoid your doppelganger's attacks as you bring the speakers forward. One of his attacks includes slamming his head into the mirror or wall, causing damage to us. If you're like me, this room brought to mind that one room in Silent Hill 3. Unless I missed a note, there's no real explanation for what goes on in this room. Best left for the player to fill in the blanks. He also makes great usage of a vocal stretch of the Labyrinth track to unnerve the player. Another highlight is right next to the dance studio in the music appreciation room. You got a preview of it at the very start of this video. The long-haired spider lady on the roof. Who is she? What's her story? The game gives us nothing. At least here. They did give her backstory in a note that you could find in the remake, but I prefer not knowing where she comes from. Some things are better left for the player to fill in the blanks. Those movements of hers unnerved me. Building 3 is where the major plot elements begin to fall into place. Over the span of a few years, a music teacher began to look more into why these events were occurring at the school. All these strange deaths. School authorities had no reason why. Which leads me to wonder, why would you ever go to school here? Why ever work here? Why did He-Min transfer here? You'd think with all these various happenings over the years, they'd abandon or demolish the school. Word would spread of what happened. Why would you ever want to send your children here? Building the school on this land was a mistake with its past history. Land better left untouched. Its building disrupted the flow of energy. They would bring in a feng shui master to help deal with the situation. Now, feng shui is something mentioned in a few notes up until now, but I have not mentioned. What is feng shui in a nutshell? It's the ancient Chinese art of arranging building, objects, and spaces for harmony and balance. An idea with deep roots in Taoism, feng shui has 5 elements: wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. The feng shui master created 5 amulets for the 5 elements from a peach tree to ward off spirits. We have already picked up 3 of them. They acted as a barrier to suppress negative energy. As time passed, the amulets began to siphon the life energy of students and staff and trap spirits. This negative energy continued to grow and is now ready to burst. What will happen is unknown, but it can't be good. With such energy, the school becomes a contact point between the living and the dead, which got the music teacher thinking. Would it be possible to resurrect the dead by reversing the circulation? To do so, there need to be a disruption of the amulet's powers and a suitable body for a host. We'll run into the music teacher himself, or at least what remains of him. Adding to the otherworldly nature of this encounter is that he has no voice dialogue. Not a sound, only the text on screen. How he met his end is never outright confirmed, but implied to be his own doing from a note we found in the previous building. He expresses regret for unraveling the school's secrets. He mentions a woman coming to him, begging for his help, and how he could not fulfill her desperate wish. What that wish was, he doesn't say, but we will discover later. There's a tape we can find that plays the same audio we heard from the phone call earlier. We can reverse it to get its true contents. A girl suffocating, mentioning a fire. Is this related to what the music teacher is speaking about? Was this desperate wish related to resurrecting the dead? That answer will come in time, but not this moment. Before leaving, he tells us to collect all the amulets and dismantle the barrier in the correct order to put the spirits at ease. Reuniting with So-young, she gives a reason for coming here at night. It's for her older sister. Her sister died 3 years ago by her own hand. So-young is trying to find out why she would do that. The janitor will interrupt our reunion as So-young runs off into the next building. Amusing once again how she could do so without the amulet while we need to. As well, we could run into Ji-yeon on the top floor. This will be the last appearance with the ending path I got for this playthrough. The hang girl we saw earlier, she's back, floating next to the circuit breaker on the top floor of the atrium. When I saw her, I approached her at a crawl. I'm waiting for that cliche scare of her warping right up to me face to face before vanishing. But no, White Day does not fall victim to that cliche. She remains in place, unmoving. She still remains a helpful spirit to guide us forward. Before we can move on to the next building, there's a couple puzzles for us to solve in this building's end stretch. One involves setting the right time on clocks next to pictures or locations from around the world. We're given a note about GMT and need to set the clock times to their correct time zones. It's another one of those puzzles that will change its answer for each playthrough. It's in a similar vein to the safe puzzle with the sports ball in the first building. Use the note you found, work it out in your head or on paper, and set the right times. There's always that moment of anticipation and anxiety as I set the final one. Did I get all these clocks set right? We now have access to the rooftop, but the path forward is not quite clear. We'll need to make use of these rods we picked up to detect strange energy. We get one of those classic game exploration puzzles. We need to find the right path that isn't visible to our eyes. With the rods, we can find the path, which is quite a long one, to obtain the 4th amulet. But there is one final roadblock to deal with before we move to the next building, but mention the note we found earlier.
내 이름 썩문을 하지 못해! 감히 여기가 어디라고! 살아서 나갈 생각은 마라! 비켜줘요! 들어가게 해주세요! 안돼! 이거 나요! 안돼! 시끄럽다니까! 조용히 하라니까! 네 놈이 뭔데 회방을 놓는 거야? 그동안 저 세상으로 가지도 못하고 구천을 떠났어. 이만큼이면 다시 살아날 자격이 충분히 있어. 그러니까 뭘 한다고 난리야? 방해하는 놈은 다 죽어!
Dealing with this woman is a frustrating stretch due to the precise timing required. What we need to do is head to the top floor of the atrium to the circuit breaker by the spirit we saw earlier. We need to flip the switch to set off the alarm at the exact right time. During this cutscene where she appears, we can see how much the noise of the janitors infuriate her. This also came up in a note we found in the first building with how the alarms drive her even crazier than she already is. She began appearing at odd times on school grounds about 3 years back, an insane woman driven mad by something that happened around that time. If you flip the alarm switch too early, it only startles her and you need to reset the breaker. If you screw that up, you're more or less dead. As fast as the janitor can kill you, she's even faster. If you time it right, she will plunge to her death.
아직은 안 돼. 지금
Who was this woman? At the moment, we don't have an answer. My first thought was that she was So Young's mother, driven mad by the death of her older sister. But you would think that So Young might have mentioned something about that by now. And bless this woman's grieving heart for taking care of those janitors once and for all. We are now in the game's end stretch. No more janitors to deal with in the final 2 sections. The next building is far shorter, linear fare. Turning up the lights will show So Young lying unconscious on the stage. But before we reach her, we have yet another roadblock. That long fall the woman took earlier from the previous building, guess that wasn't enough.
살아서는 아무도 못 나가. 여기서 다 같이 죽는 거야. 니들은 우리 딸을 위해 다 죽어줘야 돼. 도망칠 생각은 하지 마. 여기서 나갈 방법은 없다.
So there you go, she is a mother. At this point, I am thinking this is So Young's mother, distraught at the death of her eldest daughter from 3 years ago, but further revelations are to come. What follows is a stretch where White Day does feel a bit ahead of its time, but in a different way. One of those set-piece moments that wouldn't feel out of place in a modern game. You're on a timer, a very generous one, to clear the path forward by extinguishing the fires, but some fires require a certain fire extinguisher to put out. The woman will chase us, but she moves at a snail's pace, making her mostly a non-factor. Turning the sprinkler valve not only will extinguish the fire, but this woman's soul, letting her rest in peace. The small yet significant gesture, He-Man shows kindness toward her suffering. With that, we reunite with So Young and obtain the 5th and final amulet. Now it's time to put these spirits at ease. We will also run into Sung-ah, her first appearance since she ran away in the first building. But something isn't quite right with her.
결국은 해냈잖아. 한두 개 부셔놓고 끝낼 줄 알았는데. 어떻게 됐어? 잘 된 것 같다. 아마 언니도 하늘나라로 갔을 거야. 바보 같은 기집애. 아무것도 모르고 있잖아. 너도 나영이랑 같이 가. 왜 그래? 사람은 왜 그렇게 빤히 쳐다봐? 도대체 무슨 일이야?
The labyrinth serves as the game's climax, and boy, do things get confusing with the plot here. The handy little mini-map, we need to navigate the labyrinth and place all 5 amulets to defeat the labyrinth's master. The master of the labyrinth has been possessing Sung-ah all this time. Throughout this stretch, we will hear phone calls and past conversations, which can be hard to focus on while you're navigating through the maze. As well, the text can be hard to read for it blends in with the surroundings. I had to read through the fan wiki to try and piece this all together, and even then I'm not quite sure I still have it all right. What adds to the confusion is the remake, which does have some notable difference in plot elements. The wiki at points likes to blend the two together, but I will try my best. The grieving mother from earlier, the one I thought was So Young's mother grieving over the death of her older sister, that is not correct. This woman is the mother of Sung-ah, who died from an asthma attack from a fire-related accident in the school 3 years ago. A fire broke out in the home economics room. Ironic enough, this room is right next to where we first meet Sung-ah. That was her suffocating from the phone call and tape recordings we heard earlier. Sung-ah's death drove her mother mad. So Young's older sister, a close friend of Sung-ah, was left racked with guilt. The grieving mother learns about the theories that the music teacher concocted of using the school's energy to resurrect the dead. This was the desperate wish he talked about earlier when we met his spirit. They would use So Young's older sister as a sacrifice and a host for Sung-ah's spirit to return. But the spirit that we see in the labyrinth, some spirit of unknown origin, had other plans. She would possess So Young's older sister to interfere. It's unclear if the labyrinth's master drove So Young's sister to her death, or that was of her own volition. That spirit we've seen throughout who has been helping us, that is So Young's sister, trapped within the school. It was her that called Ji Young, who mistaken her for So Young to come to the school that night. The labyrinth's master, with the death of So Young's sister, would then possess Sung-ah and continue going to school. Which, wouldn't her mother notice that? To be fair, she's past the point of sanity, and even then, perhaps she knows that something is possessing her daughter? As well, you would think some of the school staff or other parents would know who her mother is. You would think someone would have been able to identify this woman who's been stalking school grounds for the past 3 years. Further adding to the confusion, there's a flashback back in the third building that I didn't bring up when we talked to Ji Young. She says that So Young ignores Sung-ah as if she can't see her at all, but we can see her. And it is clear that So Young does not see Sung-ah. That moment before we enter the labyrinth, she does not acknowledge her until that very last moment. Why this is the case, I do not know.
왜 그래? 사람을 왜 그렇게 빤히 쳐다봐? 도대체 무슨 일이야?
So from what I can gather, So Young's sister called Ji Yeon to the school to interfere in the possessed Sung-ah's plans. But Sung-ah looked like she was going to use Ji Yeon to help her with the amulets. But our appearance here, by sheer coincidence, opened up another option. Sung-ah would use us instead to gather up the amulets to unleash this negative energy once and for all. But as the music teacher's spirit told us, we instead could put these spirits at ease in the right order. I looked through my footage, read the wiki, watched a video explain the plot, which was on the remake, so there are some differences. I'm still not 100% clear on things here. Now be fair, that's okay. No issues leaving things up to interpretation. Where the issues reside is some unclear and vague character motivations. It's a bit foggy with what the master of the labyrinth has in mind and its earlier possession of So Young's older sister. Makes it a bit hard to feel invested in what's at stake here in the game's end stretch. It's too bad, for White Day has been great with building its plot up until now. But there could have been some more simplification to make each character's goals and motivations easier to understand. That said, there's more to the story here I haven't touched on, but hold that thought for now. Once we place all the amulets, the labyrinth begins to collapse. Sung-ah and the labyrinth's master plunge to their demise. So Young sits before us. We can either grab her and escape, or leave her, resulting in 2 different endings. If we save her, she will shake her hand, thank us before walking off. The school seems to be at peace. If we leave her behind, a spirit will watch us, I'm guessing that's her sister, crackling as He-Min runs off. Hey, what happened to Ji Yeon? Did we abandon her? Well, somewhat. I was close but didn't quite get the game's best ending. This ending, after saving So Young, she will hug us and will mention we should go find Ji Yeon. White Day, as mentioned, has quite the array of endings. 8 in total. Take the first letter of each ending and you can spell out White Day. From what I understand, the reason I didn't get the best ending is I didn't give So Young a canned coffee in the third building. She made mention of it, but I didn't have one in my inventory at the time. I went to a machine, bought one after, but she wouldn't take it. But now let's rewind the clock, all the way back to the first building. After we defeat the tree, we have the option of following Sung-ah or the sounds of a girl crying. If you follow Sung-ah, this sets you down a whole path of different possible endings.
나도 들었지? 여자의 울음소리였어. 분명히 소영이 걔가 불러낸 거야.
So Young herself will not appear again save for one of these endings. Instead, we'll run into Sung-ah at points where we would have run into So Young in my previous playthrough. With Sung-ah's path, you can witness how much more manipulative she is, getting us to question So Young at every turn. Instead of a late-game revelation, we learn about the death of So Young's sister much earlier. In the second building, we can meet Sung-ah's crazy mother earlier in the story.
지금 여기 누가 있어? 저 아줌마 왜 여기 있지?
In the third building, there's an amusing moment where Sung-ah will deal some serious damage to the first janitor. In the final building, it's Ji-yeon on stage and not So-young. After dealing with the fire, we can't help her with her sprained ankle or look for the others. If we help her with the ankle, the two have a tender moment as the game ends. If we look for the others, we'll cross paths again with Sung-ah as the curtains close. With this path, there is no trip to the labyrinth. The labyrinth's master, or Sung-ah, has won.
너 걸리적거리긴 했어도 앞으로는 인사나 하고 지내자. 아, 그리고 너 정말 바보야.
There's a couple of other endings along this path, including one with So-young now trapped as a spirit within the school. This ending path depends on dialogue choices you made with Sung-ah and Ji-yeon. As well, our dialogue choices will have different scenes play out. There's plenty buried away here that requires several playthroughs to see it all. If you want to up the ante, you can try the other two difficulty levels past normal. One with more vigilant janitors, a 2-hour time limit, and no saves. If you die, you're done. And so ends White Day. After its launch, some higher-level staff would head off to Europe for vacation. Curious on reception, they would head to a PC cafe to check out forums and found themselves floored by the positive responses. They would release patches to address some of the difficulty issues and scares. Many couldn't finish the game due to how scary they found it. The lower difficulties would remove the floating head ghost. And despite the strong reception, it was very much a niche title for South Korea. They didn't meet their sales expectations. The game had a small file size that the team inflated with dummy data to discourage piracy. Even then, that wasn't enough to deter piracy. As mentioned at the beginning of the video, an English port for 2004 never came to fruition. It wasn't until the early 2010s that the game would get fan patches for English and other languages. In 2015, the game would get a remake, first on mobile and then on PC and consoles. The remake did have some staff return from the original game. The CEO at the time of the original would go on to direct the remake. I did mention earlier that I doubt I will look at the remake. I watched a bit of a playthrough and was not impressed with what I saw whatsoever. A far greater emphasis on jump scares that lost the subtleties of the original. A remake that very much looks to have leaned into being a streamer bait horror title that was huge at the time. I'll compare one scene between both versions to show this stark contrast. The one where we first meet the spirit of So-young's sister. One of the best moments of the original game. One with incredible usage of lighting to build dread, where less is more. A scene that had me leaning away from my monitor. The remake? Well, see for yourself. My goodness, is this a downgrade. There would be more for the White Day series, for as we know with horror series, you can't just leave them be. There was a 2021 Korean film adaptation, White Day, Broken Limit, or The Labyrinth in the West. I did not watch it, but looking at reviews, seems like it falls in line with your typical film or TV adaptation of a video game, which, if you're still watching in this day and age, why? There would be a game sequel in 2023 released over 3 episodes. White Day 2, The Flower That Tells Lies. a sequel that takes place one day after the events of the first game with a new cast of characters. An earlier iteration that was cancelled was set to be a sequel. I haven't played it, and looking at footage and reviews, I intend to keep it that way. I'll stick with the first and only the original, thank you. For the original White Day is well worth your time. One that was well ahead of its time, a near decade before this style of horror took the gaming world by storm. It makes great usage of its high school after dark setting. The game shows a strong understanding of survival horror fundamentals, from exploring to puzzles. Sure, the constant hounding of the janitors did wear out their welcome by game's end, but there was much within White Day to keep me engrossed and engaged. From one of the better plots I've come across in a horror game, to the scares it delivers with spirits and other things that go bump in the night. If you're looking for something off the beaten path with regard to survival horror, a niche title that fell through the cracks, you can't do much better than White Day. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you haven't done so. Try that newfangled hype feature as well if you're on your phone. Don't know exactly what it does. It just seems to help with the confounded algorithm from what I've heard. Curious to hear your thoughts in the comments below, especially if you played the original and or the remake. For my South Korean viewers out there, which is a tiny fraction of my viewers looking at analytics, but a fraction nonetheless, do let me know any insights you have on the game if you played it back in the day, anything I've missed. If you'd like to support the channel further, do consider becoming a Patreon or YouTube member, get earlier access to videos, your name in the credits, and my undying gratitude amongst other things. You also leave a one-time donation through a super thanks or Ko-fi. Speaking of credits, special shout out to the Boulder Punchers who give extra support to the channel. For those in complete global saturation tier, American Boot, Flan Nagel. For those in the thank you for your patronage tier, Tom Terrible. For those in the now this is Boulder punching tier, Ethan, James Warner, Cray, Nate2, the original Narcisse Diet Thick Dew TM Neo Edition. For those in the Jill Sandwich tier, On Hell, Benji, Benny Winterdawn, BBF and Bloxburg, Dragonfang Studios, James Kilgore, Leonard Aronson, Logan Lepin, Mad Morpheus Gaming, Mikhail B, Neko Pero, Sam Jones, Strababina, Vinyl Morpheus, Will Han, and Zin. And now for the post-video Q&A, so those in the Jill Sandwich tier and higher can ask these. From Flan Nagel, say you were a transfer student to Yeondu High School, how long do you think you would last in this situation? Do you speak any Korean or know anything about Taoism, or would you be in deep trouble once the nightmare began? Oh, I'd be done on the Korean front. I know about as much Korean as Lucille Bluth in Arrested Development does. Annyeonghaseyo, annyeonghaseyo, 감사합니다, bulgogi, bibimbap. I had to quadruple check I had the right pronunciations for character names while making this video. Don't know much about Taoism either, so without being able to read, I would have limited options in progressing and hiding from the janitor. If I can't defend myself like He-Min does here beyond running and hiding, I would not make it past the first building. Thank you, Flan Nagel, for your question. From Neko Pero, lots of people have very particular things that when seen induce some degree of mental torture. For example, it evokes a physical reaction from if I see something gross with eyeballs. Another common one for some people is fingernails. It doesn't have to be restricted to body horror, but what are some things that get under your skin when you see it in the media? With your fear there, I have to wonder how you felt about that one bit near the end of Dead Space 2 with regard to eyeballs. For myself, the first one that pops to mind is needles. I hate looking at injected needles. I gotta look away at those moments. I rewatched Terminator 2 not that long ago and got squeamish at that one scene where Sarah makes an escape attempt from the asylum, where she takes that one staffer hostage with a syringe in his neck. When I did my video on the Saw video game last year, I rewatched the first 3 films for it. That needle pit in Saw 2? No thank you. The worst one I can recall is with Pulp Fiction, where they inject Uma Thurman's character with a shot of adrenaline. Now, if I myself am getting blood work done or something requires a shot, I don't like it, but I'm not terrified of them. I just don't like looking at them entering and being in the human body. I ask them when to look away in those cases. So that's the main one for me. So thank you, Neko Pero, for the question. Thanks again, everyone, for watching. I will see you in the next video. You have a heart of gold. Don't let them take it from you.
Ha 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 ha.